Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the matinee show of the 2023 Optiv Source Eurocon. My name is Amil Karimi, and today I will be going over with you a little bit of cyber threat intelligence topics, including, what does the I in CTI actually stand for nowadays? Does it really stand for intelligence, or is it just a lot of information being thrown around? Additionally, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about reapplying risk and fundamentals of intelligence back into the intelligence process, as well as go over something that we've come up with here at the Global Threat Intelligence Center called the threat actor metric. So more on that here shortly. So as I presented myself earlier, my name is Amil Karimi. I am the principal consultant here with the Global Threat Intelligence Center at Optiv under our Enterprise Incident Management team. And so as the principal, what exactly do I do here? I am in charge of intelligence delivery and solutions architect. We do have our practice managers and practice directors that make the high level decisions for us, but I'm here to help, as far as the advisory and solutions architecture types of what sort of offerings we can provide from our experience as intelligence professionals. Providing mentorship to other folks on the Optiv team for intelligence matters, as well as promoting brand strategy, things like that. I did serve in the U.S. Army as a 96B all source intelligence analyst. I've been doing so for about over 16 years now. I did spend 6 years overseas in Afghanistan in the OEF theater. I've been with information security for about 10 years. And I have a little bit of experience working CISO and internal risk teams and security advisory positions, studying adversary behaviors and research, and just kind of turning from reactive threats to a more proactive approach for our customers. And so the first thing we'll go over today is going over risk management versus external threat information, both which are quite important when putting together your analysis and providing information which you turn into intelligence for customers. And so threat hunting versus risk hunting. So we hear a lot about threat hunting. And threat hunting basically does rely on a lot of external threat information, basically what our adversary is doing right now. And based off of what they're doing right now, we collect those indicators of compromise, aka IOCs, and see if we can take that and identify or locate if any of those IOCs are located within our own environments or within a customer's environments, to see if there's any sort of adversary activity going on. And that's great. That's very important. Threat hunting helps not only our incident response consultants, but also our customers understand how adversaries work, where they're usually sitting, where the persistence is, where the initial access comes from, and to sort of predict in the future what the location of a future campaign's artifacts might be located and what the behavior would look like. So we do have this very strong focus on external activity, but not so much talk about self-evaluation, your proactive stance. And that goes back to Information Security 101, your defense in depth, looking at your own defensive posture, looking at what you're running in your own environment. And instead of doing threat hunting, you take the proactive measures of doing risk hunting, aka risk management. And so if you strictly rely on just adversary emulations, which a lot of times may be based off of outdated techniques, outdated tools, you leave yourself open to a lot of gaps. You're not really looking at, well, basically you're reacting to what's going on instead of being proactive and saying, hey, instead of what one adversary is doing or was doing 4 years ago, why don't we just take a look at what, half a dozen to a dozen adversaries are doing and see what the overlaps are, and see if there's a way we can mitigate the risk from multiple adversaries all at once, instead of trying to chase everything that comes up, daily in the security news feeds. And so, like I said, we're going into a proactive stance with risk hunting. and that provides context and relevance for threat researchers. It does serve as the other half of intelligence, which is, like I said, the external stuff, which is looking at what adversaries are doing, and then looking at yourselves to see, we see what the adversaries are doing, what are we doing for ourselves to protect ourselves, where are our risks, where are our gaps, and a lot of risk factors go into identifying your overall, risk profile. So things like your undocumented devices, accounts that may have been expired or have just been inactive for a long time, the level of privileges for your active accounts. Do all of these users need to have access to all your directories, all your databases? Are they allowed to download anything and everything that they're wanting to download? Or are there restrictions to what they can do? And that goes into things like unauthorized software, as well as doing a little bit of vulnerability assessments. What are the high risk and the most commonly exploited software that adversaries are going after? And are we running that in our own environment and prioritizing those software and services and assets? So if a vulnerability is announced, those are the ones we take care of first, because those are the ones that the adversaries are going to jump on most frequently. And those are our most common initial access or persistence or lateral movement vectors. And so I talk a lot about risk. And so one of the things I wanted to point out is that even though risk and intelligence can talk to each other across the table very well, they're not one and the same. I do know some friends that work at organizations where the intelligence function falls under risk, and it doesn't work out. But like I said, we do really well sitting across the table and talking about risks and being proactive. But one managing the other is a completely different animal. So intelligence does stay under more of a threat or research function and not just risk. And most people, when they think of risk, they think of BCP, DLP, things like that. So intelligence should be a separate function from your traditional risk group or risk department. So going into my title slide of what does the I in CTI really stand for nowadays, there is a lot of talk about new and novel things and procedures and tools that adversaries are doing. And what is that? What does that usually entail? Post-incident stuff, right? It's all reactive, and all that research is great. It's fine, but it starts to sound very reactive after a while, and we're really not talking about the proactive part of intelligence and risk management. And I don't think that sort of information is being circulated enough as it should. And so cyber threat information, as I sort of jokingly say, is often not contextualized. It's often not relevant. It may or may not be actionable. And I think one or more of those is very important for a proper definition of intelligence, relevance being most important. And I think intelligence should also account for proactive and defensive measures, and not just focusing on what adversaries are doing. What are we doing to mitigate what the adversaries are doing? Why don't we look at the patterns? Why don't we look at historical behaviors of multiple adversaries instead of just chasing what happened yesterday or what happened 6 hours ago? It's all important in hindsight, but at the same time, when you look closely into what a lot of adversaries are doing, it all starts to sound the same. It all starts to look the same. And so I very strongly feel that once your high risk and high priority systems and devices or network assets are identified, your threat hunters, your prevention engineers, your detection engineers can start prioritizing all the different adversaries, all the different campaigns, and all those techniques to start testing those in your environment. So instead of having to test multiple things that may or may not be relevant to you, you can actually start crafting more custom rules and detections that are more bespoke for your environment. And that's saving time and that's saving resources. So another thing we're going to talk about here is we'll touch on attribution a little bit, reactive analysis, and then going into a little bit more into proactive fundamentals and the defense in depth topics. So this is something that if you have been on information security Twitter for even 11 minutes, you have either heard this phrase or some variation of it. The concept of old is still new is not new to the gTIC at least. And I think the rest of the industry is finally starting to catch on, albeit slowly. It took a while. The pendulum is starting to swing back to fundamentals and relevance, and it's becoming more normalized after the past several years of research and innovation in the field of attribution, which took a hold back in 2012, 2013. I think relevance rather than hype and innovation for the sake of innovation is starting to capture the attention of researchers. And I think that's a very positive move, especially in what we do here with the gTIC, cyber threat intelligence. I think, talking about attribution, it's very helpful, of course. We definitely leverage the information that comes from researchers that are very attribution focused, but I think at the same time, we're missing out on the even more important topic of being proactive and looking at your own assets instead of, geopolitical finger pointing. I think that helps less of our customers than taking the fundamental approach. And I think in cyber threat and cyber risk intelligence, the real holy grail or the real cup of a carpenter for those of us that are 40 and up is a more complete defense in depth picture. Keyword defense, right? Defense in depth, because we are not offensive. We do not hack back. We leave that to government agencies and long drawn out political strategy to handle things like that. So proactive intelligence supporting defense and risk management is, again, in my humble opinion, more important than reactive attribution. And this is coming from a former human target. I spent a lot of time with the Air Force Office of Special Investigations doing human support, human analysis, and targeting as a result of our human, which is pretty much full-time attribution, right? You cannot get that information incorrect when you're supporting an action arm. And so for a humaner to say attribution really needs to kind of chill here in InfoSec, you sort of pay attention to that. So knowing your systems and everything that's present in your environment or that's being run within your environment can be prioritized as part of your defense in depth based off of intelligence information collected, analyzed, and estimated around overall adversary behaviors and real world incidents. And this is the intent of our service for our customers here at Optiv and the gTIC. It's to assist in the defense and preparation with intelligence analysis and our estimates. And so looking objectively at techniques and tools used by adversaries can also support more practical assessments as well, as far as prioritization efforts. So a threat actor deemed a state sponsor or an APT or a ransomware does not necessarily constitute the highest prioritization unless we observe those techniques and procedures and they're objectively analyzed and assessed and mapped to known risk factors like tools, software, services that not only you're running in your environment, but they're actually actively being targeted by those groups. And also, again, whether they are relevant. The relevance comes into, are we using those technologies? And so there are a few questions that come to mind when we see an adversary and we need to take a step back to decide, hey, should we prioritize all the information coming out about this adversary or this campaign? Foreign government espionage attacks are, they usually make the most headline. But if you take every single business in the entire world and divide that over the number of APT attacks, you'll notice that the math shows that those attacks are in reality quite fringe. Obviously, we have to account for the unknown, the companies and the campaigns that we just don't know about that are going on. But they make the news. But overall, they are a very, very small percentage of overall attacks. Now, again, some companies probably need to be more concerned about those attacks based off of what their company does, the products or services they produce, the business verticals that they sit in. Those are part of your risk factors. Those are part of your proactive assessment of not only the technologies that are running in our environment, but where do we sit from an economic standpoint? Where do we sit from a geopolitical or geographical standpoint? Are we an attractive target for certain adversaries? So all of those things come into play when starting to prioritize your defense in depth and prioritizing certain adversaries. So asking yourself, are you at risk? And if you think you're at risk, why do you think you're at risk? And if you have decided that, then okay, what will they come after? And when are they going to come after it? And how are they going to come after it? Notice we're not really focusing on the who, because if you're compromised, you're compromised. Most of our customers are not in a position to either hack back or really, really care whether it was Iran or China. Yes, we need to keep track of what they're doing, but if something happens, it doesn't really matter who. It's just, it's happened, and now we need to handle business. And so that's where the gTIC comes in. And so the challenge that arose when we came up with the threat actor metric was we have multiple frameworks and techniques that are available for us to map and determine the technical capabilities and values of adversaries. And I emphasize technical because that's what our industry seems to be very focused on, is technical capabilities. We have excellent frameworks like the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We have the cyber kill chain. These are all been used for quite a few years, and they're very good. And they support not only defensive but also your I don't want to say offensive, but your external focus of what adversaries are doing, their technical capabilities once they're inside a network, once they're sitting on endpoints. But I think what we're missing is that qualitative and, dare I say, subjective approach, because that's sort of what real intelligence analysis really has to offer, is an analyst with years of experience and professionalism having that subjective assessment of, hey, we're seeing all this information, but this is what I really think. And there are measurements like that that are available. So we have like the CVSS score for measuring the criticality of vulnerabilities. And there's a certain set of questionnaire and things like that that determine a vulnerability being a 5.6 versus a 9.8. We also have something called the Carver scale. Now, this is something that was developed by special operations for ground targeting, and it basically measures a target's or an adversary's impact on the battlefield, as well as the blue team's impacts if the adversary is neutralized or if the adversary escapes. And again, these are very subjective because it's the analyst making the assessment of if the target is taken out or if it's not taken out. This is the risk and the reward of going after this potential target. And I think that, those subjective qualities really add to that holistic intelligence picture that I think was missing from information security. And so, current industry practices and mindsets do pose that challenge of, being very technical, but not looking at it from that, subjective and qualitative approach. And I think that's very important to give a proper risk and threat picture to our customers. And so the proposal for something to fill in the gap was we needed something that was, non-technical, something that people that are not necessarily in our industry could still understand, something that we could communicate to our customers and communicate to other individuals in our own industry that come from similar backgrounds as myself, which is very not technical, but we can still speak, professionally regarding intelligence matters to our customers and to our peers. And something that had, it was multifaceted. It wasn't just here's a number or here's a grade and it is what it is. We needed something that we could back up and we can explain in detail as to how we came across this assessment, how we came across this calculation. And it just adds this added depth to risk-based intelligence and to support, proactive and defensive measures, remediating recommendations, and showing this nice visual. So it's not just a bunch of words or a very technical paper. It's, here's our explanation and here's what it looks like on a chart. Because being in the Army for several years, I have to say, higher level leadership, they necessarily don't have a lot of time to read through a whole document. So throw up a nice pretty picture and a number. If you can explain it, then they can understand it. And it just helps that communication process a little bit better. And so what we did was we came up with the threat actor metric, and we broke it down into two major categories: capability and intent, or I'm sorry, two major categories: capability and intent. And then within those categories, we broke it down further into 6 more subcategories. And the overall total score was out of 100. And so under capability and intent, we came up with a few subcategories that sort of contributed to each of those headings. So under capability, we have things like the acquisition, we have adaptability, we have focus, and then we also have the duration. And under intent, we came up with, motivation. What are the driving factors behind each adversary's or each campaign's attacks, as well as objective. What's the end goal? What's the desired impact of said adversary or said campaign? And so just to provide an example, and these actually have been used in gTIC deliverables and gTIC reports for over a year. And so we're just finally coming, into the public and kind of explaining it a little bit and presenting it, personally, and giving sort of an introduction as to, what it is and how we're using it and why we think it's going to be very beneficial for Optiv's customers. So this chart here sort of gives a visual and numerical summary of an example adversary I picked. I just picked APT22. It shows how highly they score in the various dimensions that we just went over. The seemingly lower score of adaptability and acquisition is balanced out by a strong showing in terms of how well they stay undetected and the driving force behind their operations, like I said, the motivation. And so an intelligence analyst would look at this chart and interpret this adversary as not too highly capable. They have the intent to remain persistent and undetected for a long period of time in order to exfiltrate data, and then make proactive or a risk-based assessment, a recommendation based off of APT22's tactics and targeting patterns. And so I picked 2 more here just to show the contrast between various groups. Ransomware is often inferred as the big bogeyman behind all corporate nightmares, and they are. Ransomware, we've dealt with a lot of ransomware incidents, and it is very hectic and very chaotic and very stressful for our customers. But as far as their actual capability, and the inverse of that is the ability for organizations to deflect a potential ransomware attack, where do they stand up using our metric? And it shows that capability-wise, the ransomware business and the ransomware affiliates more or less are pretty much doing the same thing with little focus on bespoke or novel techniques. Yes, you'll have your 1 or 2 exceptions, but for the most part, they're relatively doing the same thing. Most of the attacks are opportunistic, and they're not truly targeted. They're just looking for security holes based off of vulnerabilities that have been announced, or tools that have been tried and true for many years. So they're just more, like I said, opportunistic and not just extremely focused on just one specific organization. Again, there will be exceptions, but overall, I think it's safe to say that proper proactive and defensive measures could deflect not only potential ransomware attacks, but attacks from other threat actor types as well. So going back to what this means for Optiv's customers, um, what we're trying to do here with our threat actor metric is we're helping translate technical jargon and the myriad of attribution, all the overlap, into a simpler but effective and relevant visual that sort of quantifies and helps prioritize threats, and in turn supports risk management. And so instead of adding more noise to an already very noisy practice, we're helping consolidate and focus all the information and all the different ways that that information can be presented. Um, so Optiv has been regarded as the only pure play cybersecurity company in this industry, which speaks to the concept of something that's known as the singularity. Um, there was a very interesting speech that the CEO of Cartier, the jewelry and watch company, gave. I think maybe a year or so back. He spoke about the singularity. When I heard that speech, it kind of resonated with what Optiv is doing and what we're doing here with the gTIC. And it talks about how Cartier and other certain brands stand out. They have their one thing that they have perfected, if you will, or at least continue to innovate on or focus on, and that keeps them relevant in economic downturns, in geopolitical shifts and things like that. And the reason that resonated with myself is because Optiv has been known as the only pure play cybersecurity company that Optiv can only do that. And in that sense, I feel that threat actor metric that we've put together for our customers, that is sort of a singularity of the gTIC, where when our customers and our peers look at that, they're able to say that only Optiv or only the gTIC can do that and do it right. And that's our singularity. And I really appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking again next year. Thanks so much.